I wanted to just talk very briefly about the MBTA Advisory Board, as we're just waiting for one final panelist to join us in a moment. The Advisory Board, for folks that aren't aware, is the voice of riders via the cities and towns. There's 176 cities and towns in the MBTA service district. The district ranges from Bourne at the Cape Cod Canal all the way out past Fitchburg, and from Amesbury, Salisbury in the northeast is down to the Rhode Island border. In the west, we take in almost all of Worcester County and almost all of central and eastern Massachusetts, and that is about 75% of the state's population. And these are all areas where the MBTA either runs or abut communities that have service. So it is a large area, an area that we've been trying to coordinate municipal leaders on for a long time, and Zoom has been very helpful in recent years in getting folks together more easily without having to travel into Boston from all over the Commonwealth, and we're very grateful for that that ability to do this on Zoom. And if I could put a shameless plug in, we're hoping that this will be allowed to continue, not just for groups like the advisory board, but other municipal groups that try to get together, and just to make it easier to bring folks together would be great. So we are waiting on Mayor Ballantyne. She'll be here in a moment, but in the meantime, I will introduce our third panel, which we're very grateful for them to be here. I can start. Well, actually, you know what? Let me do this instead. Let me turn it over to Mayor Tom Koch, who I introduced earlier, and he can do the introductions of the third panel. Mayor Koch.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a great morning so far. A lot of great thoughts, a lot of great insights. Certainly look forward to discussion with this panel. And as we wait for Madam Mayor, I do want to acknowledge panelist Chris Dempsey, who I came to know this year more personally, but certainly respected his tenure in various roles. Certainly was a candidate for state auditor this year. He's director of the group called Transportation for Massachusetts from 2017 and 21. He spent time as deputy chief of staff and special assistant to the Secretary of Transportation, and then assistant secretary of Transportation, and he was director of innovation from 07 to 2010. So, Chris, welcome. Glad you're with us. We have Jascha Franklin-Hodge, who is the chief of streets for the city of Boston, executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation, Carly, an active member of the Livable Street Alliance, which no surprise being the chief of streets. Previously served as Boston's chief information office from 2014 to 18, and has been a visiting fellow at the Harvard School focused on mobility, technology, and public policy. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Professor Ted Landsmark, director of the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy, regional policy, I should say. Actually, I saw Governor Dukakis at an event on Sunday, and he's amazing, still doing quite well. He was Mayor Walsh's first appointment to the Boston Planning and Development Agency's Board of Directors, first African-American on the MBTA board appointed by Governor Dukakis, and Secretary Salvucci, who we heard from today. Longtime civil rights and equity advocate, and Professor, we're glad you're with us. Brian, has the mayor joined us yet?
Not just yet, sir, but any moment.
Okay, we'll just wait. We are 2 minutes ahead, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes until Madam Mayor joins us. This was radio, this would not be good.
It's not great TV either.
Well, you know what, why don't I just give a little bit of the mayor's bio. Obviously, the mayor of Somerville, elected in 2021. She's the daughter of 2 immigrant parents from Greece, elected to the Somerville City Council in 2013. twice elected as the council president. And she was involved, very active in the Mystic View Task Force and the Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership and a number of community groups. And her advocacy was helpful in the planning and in the extension of the Green Line and work on the Orange Line. So we certainly thank her for her commitment to Somerville and the greater Boston area. And when she arrives, gentlemen, we're going to be, we got 3 questions to work through.
She is here, sir.
Beautiful. Welcome, Madam Mayor. Okay, well, Madam Mayor, we went over your bio before you joined us, so we're going to get started. And I know this is the last panel, and we'll probably try to keep this thing on time. We have 3 questions, and the first question we have, and I guess we'll go by how I introduced you guys and Madam Mayor. So the first question is really about the growth of the T over the last several years. Has it been too much? We couldn't handle it, or is it too little? And then second to that would be, should future expansion plans be shelved until we get the house in order operationally and what we currently have? So Chris, you wanna lead off on that?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Mayor. It's great to be a part of this distinguished panel and appreciate the MBTA Advisory Board pulling us all together today. It's wonderful to have such a great turnout. And I really enjoyed the conversations that we heard earlier in today's conversation with leaders past, present, and future of our transportation system here in Massachusetts. I am not someone that says that we should be freezing expansion projects at the MBTA, but I do think that we need to be cautious, and we need to understand that there is always going to be that pull for expansion, that it's easy to get excited about a shiny rail extension or a new station that could be created, but that every time we do that, we risk taking our eye off the ball for some of the core functions of the system on a day-to-day basis. I very much appreciate that we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So I still think it's smart to look at targeted expansions where they make sense. But we have to be thinking always, what are we trying to really achieve with the MBTA? Is it a system that's meant to move people efficiently and safely through Eastern Massachusetts? Is it meant to take cars off the road? Is it meant to provide basic mobility for people who can't afford personal vehicles? Is it meant to provide transportation for 9-to-5 commuters? Is it meant to reduce transportation emissions or address some of the inequities that we have? Senator Crichton raised those consistently and with good reason around environmental justice corridors. I'm not sure that it's doing any of those jobs very well today. And if it's not doing those jobs well today, we have to be careful and cautious about asking it to do even more when it's not getting the basic job done.
Thank you, Chris. Josh, you want to repeat the question, or you have a good understanding?
No, I think I have a good understanding, and
Floor is yours.
Thank you, and I'll echo Chris's thanks for you, Mr. Mayor, for moderating this, and for the advisory board for pulling us all together here today. So I think it's helpful to kind of ask what we mean when we talk about expanding the T, because the way that I look at it is not purely through this question of transportation. And, Chris gave a great list of some of the transportation functions of the T, but I view the T as a crucial part of the expansion of our economy. I view it as essential to the growth of our population. I view it as essential to the growth of business and as essential to the growth of economic opportunity in the region. And I think through that lens, we have to, as Chris said, this is about walking and chewing gum, right? Without a doubt, we need to have a system that is more reliable, that delivers on the frequency promises that have been made, that is safe, that people can trust will get them where they need to go. But we cannot make the future growth of our region contingent on solving all of those problems before we start to think about what might be ahead. Because the reality is, if we are going to grow as a city and as a region, it must be with public transit at the center. There is no pathway to growth that involves dramatic expansion of the number of automobiles on our roads. We don't have the capacity for it. We are already one of the most congested cities in the country. We pay a tremendous price for that in time, in health, in actual dollar costs. So if we actually aspire to thrive economically, to grow as a region, that means that we have to strategically expand the T alongside our vision for that growth and make some of the crucial missing connections that will allow us to both have our kind of current urban footprint expand, but also to address some of the issues that we're facing around housing unaffordability and expanding the catchment area of the transit system so that it can provide places for people to live and then access the jobs that they need to access. So to me, that really has to be the core of this, is a vision for growth centered on public transit, thoughtfully making those investments in reliability and state of good repair, while also being very clear about the opportunities that exist if we're able to expand the system in new ways and new places.
Thank you. Professor.
The public transit system is the glue that holds our region together. I am a resident of Jamaica Plain, but I've lived in Quincy and I've lived in North Shore communities. And I know that our road system is at or above capacity at this point. And we're simply not in a position to continue to expand the road system. So we've got to do what other significant American cities have done, whether you're talking about Chicago or Washington or Atlanta. And we have to look to the expansion of our public transit system as a way of addressing many of the other issues that we have in the region. And in particular, I'm referring to the access that we need to provide to affordable housing and to the drivers that we need to expand economic development and to bring people together synergistically. The entire population of our region within 128, within 95, is about the same population as the population of Brooklyn. And it's hard for us to think, despite the dispersion of multiple political jurisdictions, that what we're trying to serve is a population that is significantly smaller than the population of other areas. And without a working public transit system, we can't begin to develop the kinds of educational and employment opportunities that we need to. So from my perspective, there are continuing expansion steps that need to be taken at the same time that we address the core issues, which clearly we're not doing well at this moment.
Thank you, Professor. I think I heard you say Quincy was your favorite place to live, but I'm not sure. Madam Mayor, obviously Somerville has been a recipient of the expansion of the MBTA, and from what I understand, things are going well. So your thoughts?
They are, thank you. I'm going to ask you to repeat the question.
Sure.
If you would, please, just to make sure I'm on target here.
Sure. Essentially, has the T grown too much or too little? And going forward, should we be shelving plans and trying to take care of what we have, or continue to go both tracks?
Great, thanks for the question. So while the FTA report was an important wake-up call for the state and emphasizes the need for us as a Commonwealth to focus on efforts of maintenance and safety, I believe strongly that that's not enough. We need to do two things. As any entity, when you're managing it, you're trying to deliver the best product, the best service to your customers here and now. But if you want to grow, you have to think about the future. And you need to think about how you're going to sustain that. And if we zoom out and the governor is looking at its entity, which is the entire state, you want to try to make sure that you are delivering the best service product to the people who live here now in order for them to be able to grow and move forward. And I think as a state, we need to rewire our thinking around the T and public transit in general. We need to focus on good public transit as a driver of our economy and a benefit for everyone in the region, because it has the potential to touch so many lives in positive ways. It's good for the justices. It's good for economic justice, for the environmental justice, for the racial justice. Massachusetts needs a world-class transit system that's safe, reliable, and affordable. And that world-class vision for the system that understands its role in our economy and the future. We haven't gotten it right yet. As a daily rider of the T, I understand firsthand the importance of safe and reliable T, but I know we can do more. I'm optimistic that we can create a public transit system that riders deserve and that Massachusetts deserves. And I believe it needs to be a priority for the next administration. As I've constantly said since taking office, public transit requires sustained and predictable funding. After all, a big part of what the T looks like in the coming years depends on the priorities of the next administration and how they prioritize federal transportation and infrastructure dollars. Not only how it is spent, but in which communities the money is invested in. Historically, there has been an 80-20 split between funding roads versus transit, but states have the ability to flex some of their highway dollars to invest in transit, and they choose not to. I'm hopeful that we won't give up or don't pass on these opportunities over the next 5 years, and the millionaire's tax passing is one way to do it.
Whoa, crossing into the political issue of the day. Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're going to go to the second question. And again, we'll go back to Chris. Essentially, obviously, there's a number of modes that fall on the MBTA. You get heavy rail, light rail, bus, ferry. Which one of these should have more emphasis, if any, or which one should we focus on growing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mayor. As I thought about this question heading into the forum, I have a clear answer here, and maybe it's a little bit controversial, meant to spark some conversation. But I think the clear answer to that question is bus. I think we do not pay nearly enough attention to our bus riders. By the way, I'm one of them. I know the mayor, Mayor Ballantyne, is also a regular bus rider. We don't pay enough attention to our bus riders. We give them the worst quality service, and yet they are some of our most loyal customers. If you look at the ridership numbers, the bus has bounced back faster post-COVID than any other mode, and very consistently so over the last year and a half. We can talk about any number of bus lines that are core bus lines. Over the years, there's been a lot of talk about the 111 bus, which starts in Revere, picks up most of its passengers in Chelsea, goes over the Tobin Bridge, and ends its trip at Haymarket. Finally, after years of advocacy from groups like Green Routes and others in Chelsea, we were able to create bus lanes on the Tobin Bridge. Before the creation of those bus lanes, that trip would take 45 minutes to go 2.7 miles from City Hall in Chelsea to Haymarket. It would be faster to walk that distance, but it's of course illegal to walk over the Tobin Bridge. And so we forced those bus riders to be packed in like sardines on the 111 bus, 15,000 of them a day on a busy weekday. And for the privilege of being packed in like sardines and having a trip that's slower than walking, we actually made them pay more in bus fare than the toll on the Tobin Bridge for an auto ride. So we have some baked in inequities in the system. And I really applaud the work of you, Mayor Koch, Mayor Ballantyne. And it's been so delightful to see the work of Mayor Wu and Jascha and his team in advancing bus lanes throughout the region in the last 5 or 10 years. And I'll also give credit to Governor Baker there for focusing on bus lanes as a cost-effective way to move people. You have these roads throughout the region where half of all the human beings that are moving in that road are doing it in a bus. And we didn't traditionally elevate the bus as a priority, and we're now starting to make that change. I think one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about bus service is that it's both, not just that it's flexible, but also that it's inexpensive. So you can move a lot of people to various destinations and at relatively low cost, far, far lower capital costs than commuter rail or subway, and far, far lower operating costs in terms of what's coming out of people's pockets for their monthly pass. So we have to be doing more on bus, and I would suggest that it is a way to connect cities that we don't often think enough about. We've kind of reflexively gone to rail being the way to connect cities across the state. And I think we should be paying much more attention to intercity buses as a starting point to build up that ridership between different cities in the state. And once we've got that ridership built up, then converting it to rail where it makes economic sense. It's a very long answer to the question, Mayor, but we have to be elevating bus and bus riders if we want to have exactly what Jascha said we need to have, and I agree with, which is that the growth in mobility has to be through public transit. We do not have any more space for vehicles on our roads, for single occupancy vehicles on our road. It has to be through transit, and bus is a cost-effective, fast, and flexible way to do that.
Can't argue with that. Thank you, Chris. Jascha, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I certainly won't argue with that either. I think the bus is underappreciated and underinvested in, and a huge area of opportunity for us to make some transformative change. As Chris mentioned, one of the opportunities that we have is around reprioritizing how we use public right-of-way. And this obviously challenges the traditional lens that transit is the T's business and streets are city's business. It's making the bus work is everyone's business, and we have to work together. And I think we've seen incredible strides in the last few years in that collaboration, but we need to do more. And we need to be really thoughtful, especially on the back of the T's hopefully soon finalization of the bus network redesign, to look at that network and say, what are the corridors that require bus priority? How will we build them in Boston and all of the communities that those critical bus routes travel through? The emphasis has to be on, whether we're talking about bus or commuter rail or anything else, it has to be on service quality. And what we see consistently with the bus is that when it is traveling with general traffic, the quality of the service is, as expected, as good or as bad as general traffic flow is. And that means that if we do not give buses priority, we are always going to have a bus experience that is less favorable than driving a car along that same route. Because no matter what, the bus is very unlikely to stop at exactly where you're going or start exactly where you're coming from. You typically have a walk or some other transfer on either end of it. And there's an additional time penalty for the stops associated with the bus. So in order for the bus to be successful as a primary means of transit growth, it has to be better than driving that same route. And that means we have to give the bus space. We have to be willing to take that space away from cars. We've shown that it's doable. We've shown that it works. There are some key obstacles to that. The number one thing that I would highlight is the lack of ability to do automated enforcement for bus priority. This is a critical issue. We in the city of Boston are spending tens of millions of dollars building bus lanes that we have no capacity to reliably enforce, because the only mechanism that the state legislature has seen fit to grant us is to actually have police officers, uniformed police officers on the route, pulling cars over, issuing tickets. Ample evidence that automated enforcement works. You look at what New York has done on their bus priority corridors. We need it here in Massachusetts. We need it yesterday. And the state legislature needs to act to enable the T and municipalities to put that into place. The other thing that I would say is critically important as we think about the role of the bus is to think about opportunities for better intermodal transfer. So, as an example, the West Station project that's contemplated for the Alston I-90 interchange offers a way to connect people from what will hopefully be high frequency regional rail at some point in the future to a bus network that can bring them to Kendall Square, that can bring them to the Longwood Medical area. The flexibility that Chris referenced with the bus allows it to act as a sort of last 5-mile connector for much longer journeys in ways that would be much harder, much more expensive to do with traditional light or heavy rail connections. But the value comes from that connectivity, and it comes from having the foresight to recognize the places like West Station where we need to make a sizable investment in building the kind of intermodal hub that actually allows those connections and that high quality bus service to make those transitions for passengers quickly and easily. At the end of the day, all of this comes back to this question of service experience. And whether we're investing in the bus, whether we're investing in rail, whether we're investing in regional rail, if the experience of passengers is that they've got to wait 90 minutes to catch their next train, or that the bus might take 20 minutes or it might take an hour, right? Then we are not serving those passengers well. They will not choose transit, and we will find ourselves struggling uphill against rising traffic congestion as people flee transit for those who have the choice. Flee transit for other options that are more convenient. So no matter what we are investing in, it has to be an eye towards delivering that frequency, that reliability that is so crucial to making people look at transit as an option and say, I actually want that, I prefer that.
Thank you for that. And thank you for acknowledging the T has been working the last couple of years directly with cities and towns on the bus routes, trying to create great efficiency, serve those that really need it. And try to eliminate some of those inefficiencies at the same time. So thank you. Professor.
I would concur that the opportunities with bus are far greater than they are with other forms of transportation. I think about, and as a professor at Northeastern, what role the Ruggles Station plays in bringing together commuter rail, bus, Orange Line, and other forms of transportation, I mean, blue bikes and the like. And the flexibility that's available in developing the bus system, I think far exceeds what we can do elsewhere in a highly cost-effective way. I also have to wonder, given that when I was growing up in New York, I was transported to school on public buses every day from the 4th grade on. I also wonder to what extent we may want to begin to think about using our bus system and our public transit system as a way of supplementing or replacing what many of our communities are now spending on private buses within the context of our school systems. And I think that improvements to the bus system will create opportunities for us to reduce our expenditures in other areas in ways that also develop opportunities for us to have modes of transportation that cut across the network in ways that heavy rail can't possibly do.
So having said all that, are you a Red Sox or Yankees fan?
Red Sox.
Good answer. Certainly in this forum.
No matter what happens with them, Red Sox forever.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So I want to say I agree with many of the comments that was said previous, and I also with Professor Landmark's agree with school buses, using public buses instead of school buses. We actually do that in Somerville, and we also give free bus passes to youth starting in the 7th grade. So as I think of my role, as mayor of Somerville, 4 square miles, I also feel that our role is to advocate for expanded, electrified, reliable regional rail systems, as well as a great urban and rural bus service. We also need to advocate for free and reduced bus fares for low income and in our environmental justice communities. Public transit, again, is an issue that affects all of Massachusetts. We need a world-class public transit system. The statewide economy depends on it. It needs to be safe, reliable, and affordable. Climate action requires safe, reliable, and affordable MBTA. Our goals of social and racial equity cannot be realized without a safe, reliable, and affordable transit system. So one of my goals as mayor is to build coalitions with my suburban and rural counterparts in local government to work towards this common goal.
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to acknowledge that at the head of the program today, Kim Driscoll spoke, the mayor of Salem, and she did mention water transportation. So I want to throw that in as a waterfront community. I think water transportation has a play in making a difference. And you look at the Hingham route, they are so loyal to people that use that because they have a great experience in that service. And I think folks, certainly from Quincy, would jump on that. More apt to do that perhaps because of that experience than jump on the red line. So I'm the moderator. I'm not supposed to get involved in opinions. I had to throw it in there.
Well, I will remind everybody, Somerville does have waterfront on the Mystic River. So we're happy to take water services from Boston and the surrounding communities over to the assembly area.
Fair enough. We have a number of major cities that have waterfront property, and a lot of cities in the world that do a much better job with water transportation. And I think we could certainly do better. The last question for each of us today is really each of you, if you could answer the question about what is your vision? What does the T look like next 10 years, next 25 years, next 50 years? And that could include the structure of the T, that could include how we service, how the fares are, what kind of vehicles we're using, but your thoughts about, and honestly, it's been talked about really today in the other panels. This is all about the future of the T. This is about making those system changes that are going to help the next generation, because for too long, as we know, for decades, the T wasn't properly funded in this area. So Chris, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mayor. I want to build a little bit on a theme that Jascha talked about. He talked about how closely the city of Boston is now working with the MBTA on making sure that we think of our roads as spaces for transit and not have them separate in some way. That's very much a best practice. You go to a place like Seattle, and the Seattle City DOT will have employees that actually sit in the offices of the King County Metro and vice versa, because they want to be so well coordinated. Bus service is really important in Seattle. And I actually have friends in Seattle who bought their home based on a bus line, which is an experience a lot of us have in Massachusetts. You want to live near a rail line, they actually base it on a bus line because the bus service is so important. I think we should be taking a somewhat similar approach, and I want to be very clear, probably not in the next 10 years, but in the next 15, 20, 25, or 50 years, to better integrate our transit and our road system, especially within 128 and even more broadly across greater Boston and eastern Massachusetts. You already heard me share that I think buses are a hugely important way to be moving people. And that means that we need to better integrate the decisions that MassDOT as a highway entity is making, and that MassDOT with its sort of sub-entity of the MBTA is making on the transit side. We don't do a good job of that today. In fact, we do a very poor job of that today as we think about transportation governance. Those of you that have heard me speak on this topic over the years will have heard this fact before, but I'm going to share it again because I think it's so powerful. In the last 31 years, so since Governor Dukakis left office in 1991, we have raised the gas tax in Massachusetts a total of 3 cents. That amounts to 14% in 31 years. In the same period of time, we have raised MBTA commuter rail fares 250%. So the message that we have sent to the people of Massachusetts over the last 30 years is drive more and take transit less. And people have responded to that message. We have the worst congestion in the country. We have MBTA ridership that even pre-COVID was basically flat from where it had been in the 1990s, no significant increases. And then we sort of scratch our heads and we wonder why we have all this congestion where people are responding to exactly the incentives that we have provided them. A longer term view about mobility in Greater Boston would be one where we can better balance the incentives that we are providing to move around the region via transit versus driving. And there are cities around the world that do a much better job of doing that. Two in particular, and I know they're much bigger than Greater Boston, but both in New York and in London, the parts of the road network are entirely integrated with the transit network in the form of the MTA in New York and Transport for London in London. In New York, for decades now, for 70 or 80 years, tolls from the major bridges that get you in and out of Manhattan have been used to subsidize transit. Same thing is true in London, where charges from the congestion pricing scheme there subsidize transit. We basically do the opposite here, where we don't really ask drivers to pay for the cost that they impose on others, including other drivers, when they drive in Greater Boston. And I understand that that's a politically very difficult topic, but until we address that political topic, we're not going to get the reduction in congestion and air pollution and frustration that we have. We have to deal with that seriously. We have to deal with it delicately and carefully, but a longer term view would have a governance system that would better balance those competing demands. And I would suggest would leave everyone across the region better off, whether there's someone that is only going to drive, that's the only way they want to get around, would still be better off through reduced congestion, or someone that doesn't take the T or drive and just walks everywhere will have better air quality and safer streets. If you're a business owner, if you're a homeowner, if you're a renter, if you're a local leader, you are going to be better off in a system that better balances those competing demands. And I hope that we can take some baby steps there. We're not going to get it in the next 10 years, but we could be there in a 20 or 25 year time frame. And we need to be thinking that long term when it comes to some of these decisions.
So you're speaking of some real systemic changes, and it back to the underlying common denominator is Americans are in love with their automobiles, perhaps less so in the urban centers, but and at the end we got to deliver safe, reliable, good experience, no matter what mode it is, to get them out of that car. But I think those are all worthy of discussion. Chris, Chief, you want to give it a whirl?
Sure, yeah. And I'll just say, I think Americans have ambivalent relationships with their automobiles. For most Americans, they have no choice but to drive, and our job should be to create choices that can compete with automobile travel for people. I will frame my vision in a little hypothetical story, which is a person who lives in Mattapan in Boston, who on a Friday morning gets on the 28 bus, which is fare free and electric, on Blue Hill Ave, takes it directly to her job at Children's Hospital in the morning. She completes her workday. She leaves her job. She gets back on the bus. She takes it out to West Station, which is now complete. She hops on an electrified commuter rail service, regional rail service with 15-minute frequency to go stay with her sister in Framingham overnight. The next morning, she gets up, gets back on the train, hops back into Boston, doesn't have to look at the schedule because she knows the train is going to be there and it's going to be reliable and it's going to be allow her to get right back to where she needs to go home for the weekend. That's a story, right, that is not that far-fetched. We're starting to put some of the pieces of that in place. We have bus network redesign. We're planning for West Station. There's been a lot of great thinking done about regional rail. There's been investments made around bus electrification. But we have a long way to go to get from where we are today to where that kind of reality could happen. And there's a million stories like that. And you can create your own, based on your vision of where we should be investing and what our priorities need to be. But I think the challenge we have is that while we've sketched some of the pieces that would need to exist for a future like that to happen, we haven't made the clear and consistent commitment to the funding that's going to be necessary to get us there, and to the long-term expansion projects, the vision of growth built around investment in the transit system that's going to be necessary for that to be a real and successful outcome. And the thing that I find, challenging about this, right, is that a lot of great work has been done. If you read the Focus 40, report from a number of years ago that the T put together, this is their sort of, 2040 transportation vision. A lot of the elements of a future transit system are there. The problem is they're all listed in a section called what we're imagining, right? If you look at the sections that say what we're building and what we're planning, everything there is reliability and modernization. And that's great and important and critically important that we do those reliability and modernization improvements. But if our vision ends at those two things of reliability and modernization, if we can't get beyond imagining and get to planning for some of the bigger investments that could actually be regionally transformative, then we're going to be stuck in the same old pattern that we're in right now. So I think for me, when I think about a vision for the future, it is continuing to make those thoughtful investments in delivering reliable, affordable, safe service on the core system as we know it today. But it's also being willing to have political leadership that will be out there saying, if we want this future for our region, here are the things we're going to have to figure out how to build. And some of them will take time. I mean, you look at some of the transformative rail and bus projects that have happened elsewhere in the US, in Seattle, in Los Angeles, or further afield in places like London. These projects can take decades to really come to complete fruition. But we need political leadership that's willing to, show with confidence that we can continue to work on the challenges we have today and build towards that future. And we have not had that. And I think that notion of getting away from just imagination and into really brass tacks. What's it going to cost? What are we going to prioritize? What resources and staff and organizational structures do we need to deliver on these projects? Let's do that work and not just keep kicking the can down the road.
Thank you, Jascha. I don't disagree with all that, but I will say this, that I will give the political leadership currently in the corner office great credit, Governor Baker, for taking on the T, but rarely grabbing the bull by the horns, where a lot of governors just kind of, well, that's an authority, it's a separate operation, they'll figure it out. Nobody wanted to touch it. So I certainly want to acknowledge Governor Baker's leadership on this. And it was decades of catch up, quite frankly, as I know some of the other panelists kind of touched on that. We have a long way to go, but some nice thoughts there, Jascha. Thank you. Professor.
For me, the greatest change I would like to see would be a change in attitude towards public transit in general, and towards the operations of the T in particular. When I was on the T board, we focused on who our riders were and what it would take for them to feel as though they were comfortable and safe and in a place where they wanted to be every day. And as much as we say that Americans love our cars, there's a huge gap between what we see in a TV ad for driving and what we actually experience on 93 when we're sitting in traffic, either coming or going from town. And I would submit that part of the problem that we're dealing with here is one wherein we don't take seriously enough the needs of the ridership and what it is that it would take more people to use the system. When I was on the T board, we instituted announcements and T stops so that people would know how long they might have to wait if a train was delayed. Well, now we have apps that have replaced that. We put music and art in stations. We made it possible for people with disabilities to be able to access stations because we began to install elevators and the like. And my view is that we don't have enough input into the system from those people who actually use it. The leadership of all aspects of the transit system is not diverse. whether we're talking about who sits on our boards or who actually staffs the organizations, the training links that we could create between our schools and the careers that exist within public transit simply don't exist. We don't incentivize young people in cities to think about long-term careers in a system that aren't going to go away the way certain types of careers come and go. So for me, we can talk about automation, which is important. We have to talk about safety. But I think the biggest difference that I would hope for looking forward is a change in our attitude towards the role that public transit plays within our region, so that it's not viewed simply from a cost-benefit analysis, but is also viewed in terms of the service that it provides to all kinds of people, and what it is we need to do and pay for to make that service more than acceptable, but really the kind of service that people want to use in order to get out of their cars.
Absolutely agree with that. It's about the experience in the end, right? Madam Mayor?
Thank you, and I want to echo that. I agree with the comments that my esteemed panelists here have also shared, and this is the part that I think is the funnest, because we get to dream. We get to a vision. I don't have to have it constrained. So the dream, as you've heard me say this, is I want to be able to hear that our leadership in the state of Massachusetts says they want Massachusetts to have a world-class public transit system. I haven't heard it. I hear little pieces, and it's sort of it's project-based and moving, or it's the piece of it. But what's that overarching vision that we're all working towards? And for me, what I would imagine and dream for is an administration that is yelling from the treetops that they want Massachusetts to have a world-class public transit system. Again, why? Because public transit is good for everyone. It's good for employers, it's good for employees. Employers and employees can get to work, and it's good for the justices, environmental justice, racial justice, social justice. And we have the potential in Massachusetts because we have the brain trust. We have all the experts here, and they can get it right. We can have this. And so starting off that way then addresses the urgency of our time today, and it demands change. So what is the vision? The ideas that I have is I see and I envision us using public transportation as a key component to addressing what our communities look like. We're talking about 50, 70 years from now, and how it feels and how our community grows. And we also use public transit to address housing, environmental, and cost of living. So the first idea is building a 15-minute economy. In Somerville, residents constantly tell me they want 15 minutes community. Think about it. Neighborhoods that allow you to access most of the essential goods, services, and relationships within 15 minutes of travel. In a place like Somerville, that goal requires frequent, reliable MBTA bus service. When buses are running on time, most of our residents can get to grocery stores, schools, parks, cultural, faith destinations with flexibility and confidence. What are we talking about here is mobility equity, being free to travel when and where you need to at the price you can afford. We can't achieve this vision without a safe, reliable, and affordable MBTA. So now second is addressing the housing crisis. Eastern Massachusetts is facing a housing emergency. Prices have risen so fast for so long, people can't keep up. And of course, this challenge is felt most acutely by low income and people of color. There is a role for public transportation to help address the housing crisis. We can expand existing lines to encompass more communities, be it Arlington or Lynn, and use the expansion to build affordable housing around transportation nodes. We can create 15-minute communities in every part of the state. The third vision I have is about our economy and the cost of living. When companies choose to grow in a particular state or move to one, it is based on many factors, including the available talent pool, which Massachusetts certainly has, and the quality of life for employees. In Massachusetts, we have the talent pool, but we risk on the quality of life. If we have failed in our public transportation system, employers and employees will actively look to other locations to reside if the commute to work remains untenable. We do not have the space, nor should we build wider highways, but we can improve our public transportation. And, I just also want to say, as I had my staff pull some data, and research has shown in the US, we roughly spend $3,000 per capita per year on automobile infrastructure. Public transportation, by comparison, roughly receives $300 per capita per year. So we're talking about 10 times as much spending on driving versus on transit. I think that's a point that we should, pay attention to. Also, public transportation needs to be safe, reliable. As I've said, it can lower the costs of living. In Somerville, it costs about $10,000 to have a car. If residents can go from 2 to 1 car, that will save them money. If they can go from 1 car to only using public transit, that will save them money and thousands in a given year. But they have to know that the MBTA is viewed as a safe, reliable, and affordable. And then finally, it's taking on the climate crisis. Our society is facing a climate crisis. In Somerville, our community demands that we act aggressively to reduce emissions. As mayor, I've established a goal of not only eliminating emissions, but delivering on carbon negative strategy. And transportation is one of the keys to this strategy. We cannot address the climate crisis without getting cars off the road. In our little city of 4 square miles and 80,000 people, roughly 35% of our emissions are from transportation, meaning vehicle trips start and end in Somerville. So if we want a world-class MBTA, that people have confidence in and can trust in, this is one of the ways we can address climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That brings us really to the end of our time allotted. So I want to thank each of the panelists for taking the time out to be part of a thoughtful discussion about going forward. I think one of the frustrations I've seen is some of my colleagues in government, rather than being part of the solution, but merely being critical of issues without coming up with those solutions. So the only way we're going to fix this is working together going forward. And again, I appreciate each of you today, Chris, Jascha, Ted, and Mayor. Thank you for putting your time in and sharing your insights with the 100 so forth participants today, which represent a number of the communities, as we know, in the district. So thank you very much. And a broader thank you to all the panelists today. Incredible work. The same goes to them. There's so many amazing public service over the years, many of them relying are really around transportation and have contributed over the years. God, when you see Fred Salvici on the panel, you think back on the pre-big dig stuff and discussions on to resolve some of those issues. So thank you to all the panelists on each of the 3 panel discussions today. Thank you to Brian Kane for coordinating the event today. Really appreciate that. And to the advisory board members who continually represent their community. And it was said by more than one panelist today, I think Tim and Murray might have mentioned it, the importance of the local officials. That's where the rubber hits the road on these issues, to continue to educate your community, your boards of selectmen, your city council, and make sure they're connected along with our local legislators as we go forward, because this isn't going on the back burner, the issues of public transportation in Massachusetts. It's on the front burner now, and it's time that we come up with some collective solutions going forward. And I know not everyone's going to get what they want. That's part of life, right? But I think we can do a whole lot better. So with that, I'll turn it back to Brian for conclusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to note that the recording of this entire event will be available on mbtaadvisoryboard.org very soon. We will expedite its posting. Special thanks to those who made this possible: Matt Moran, Matt Mariano, Jacob Riesdorf, Dennis Kennedy, Tom McShane, Jen Manley, Joe Rica, Amira Patterson, and Deborah West. I thank you all for your attending, and we will solve this problem one way or another. We just got to work together. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.